And I think that's what's important as well, to see something about their favourite designer that's different than what they've seen before. So,
Absolutely.
hello and welcome to Board Game Bonkers. This is Under the Meeple Light Show, and today's guest, we've got Konieczka, who's designed some, well, one in particular, prolific board games. So welcome, Corey.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again. You were on season 1, weren't you?
I was. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and we'll see how this one goes. And it's quite a little bit different with the questions. But first of all, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Corey Konieczka. I'm a board game designer. I've been doing this for about 18 years professionally, but I've been making games my whole life just for fun. I got started out working at Fantasy Flight Games, where I spent 13 or so years designing games like Star Wars Rebellion, Battlestar Galactica, and dozens of other ones. And now I'm running my own studio called Unexpected Games. We've released 3 games so far, stuff like The Initiative, Voices in My Head, 3000 Scoundrels, and got even more coming out this year.
Fantastic. And yeah, Voices in My Head is quite a bit different than some other board games. And the theme is for sure quite different.
Pretty unique. That's kind of the point of our studio, Unexpected Games. We want to keep people guessing. What are we going to do next? I know, something crazy.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I hope that works out well for you. And for our viewers out there, let me just explain what this is all about. So we'll be drawing 10 questions from this board for a guest. Now, of course, a guest has no idea what the questions are. Now, there's one of the 3 different categories. We've got yes or no questions. We've got agree or disagree. And we've got what's the first phrase that comes to mind statements. So quite a bit different than season 1, Corey.
Okay.
So we'll see
So if
how
it's
we get
yes or no or something like that, I say that no elaboration at all, or what's the
on.
deal?
Definitely elaborate, definitely. It'd be interesting to get your viewpoint on why you've said yes or why you said no.
Okay.
So when you're ready, we'll dive straight into the first one.
Let's
So
roll.
let's dive into this bowl and let's see what comes out. So our first one, once we get this open, is a yes or no question. So should Board Game Geek be better moderated to cut out hatred and negativity? Now, do you go on Board Game Geek much?
Yeah, I use Board Game Geek quite a bit. Mostly, I mean, for professional purposes, but also just to check out board games that I'm interested in. Um, I don't know how, uh, I'll say, I'm going to say no on this one. And my reason why is I feel like Board Game Geek actually does a pretty decent job moderating. I'm sure a lot of other people will disagree, and I'm not an expert on this in any regards. But I have seen some threads spiral out of control and have like hatred and various things pop up, and they seem to be on top of it and they stamp it down as best as they can. Now, could every site be better? Absolutely, yes. But I think that the Board Game Geek community seems to be better moderated than, say, places like Twitter and other things that are just kind of like the Wild West. So, I mean, that's my gut feeling on this, but we could always do better. Like, people shouldn't go to communities, they shouldn't go online and have to deal with hatred for their beliefs or who they are.
Yeah, yeah. It's about you got to be respectful, haven't you, with you know, and what I call it people, people say, there are trolls out there and keyboard warriors that just bash away and sit behind the keyboard and say what they want to say without thinking about the consequences of the effect that has on another person. And it's about how would you like to be spoken to or commented on? It's about respecting that and putting yourself in other people's shoes. And it's easy sometimes to just bash away at your keyboard and not think about that.
Yeah, yeah, it's very different how people interact online versus in person, and it's a shame that it's such a, I don't know, it can be a hateful place sometimes, but hopefully we can all be better.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into our second one, Corey. And let's see if we get something more board game related than admin related. So, a yes or a no question. So, should there be an industry standard board game box size guide that every company adheres to?
I'm going to say absolutely not. And while that sounds good for our shelves, I keep looking over here, my games on my shelf. Like it's nice to have a standard size, but as like a designer and as a publisher, like sometimes you want to do crazy things, or you might want to, I don't know, make some really weird shaped box. We're gonna make a circular box. It's like a hat box. Like you should be able to do that if you want to. I know at FFG, there were a couple of different box sizes that we generally used, but there were oftentimes a situation where we had to go outside of the mold for a certain thing. And some of those sizes that we used ended up becoming kind of industry standards, like that 11 by 11 square. And I don't know, the publishers should be able to make the box that they think is the best for their audience and for their game. And people are always going to disagree. They're going to say there's too much air in this box, or this box is too small. I don't know. So many
Yeah.
opinions.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I can see an argument with, where you have a big box. I understand why people would have a bigger box and there's a lot of air in a box. You think, is there a need for that box? Well, marketing purposes, yes, because people will pay more for a bigger box than a smaller box. So people have to understand that from a business point of view. But I understand the argument of why do you need to make such a box size that big when the components don't even fit a quarter of it? Is because of the marketing side of things. And unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. Would you pay £40 for a tiny small box game, or would you pay £40 for a bigger box game? You'd go for the bigger box game, wouldn't you, in general?
Yeah, it's partially that. It's also when it's on the shelf in a store, that's advertising, right? It's a little billboard of your game. And the bigger the front of that, the more people see it. I mean, depending upon how it's shown in the store. But we have to factor in all these things when we're making games. Like, well, what's the right size for this game? How big do we want the box to be? For me, it often comes down to, well, what's the biggest component in this game? And so if we've got a game board that's 11 by 11 inches folded down, like, well, that's like the minimum footprint for this game. Um, so there's a lot of push and pull, a lot of different things to take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not as easy as a standard size fits all, is it? So,
No,
um,
it doesn't work.
so let's move into our third one, Corey. Let's see what comes out. So our third one is it's a yes or no again. So a lot of these, are there enough colorblind friendly games?
Um, so I I think we could always do better. So I guess I'd say no. But as due to the sheer number of games out there, with thousands of them being released every year, even if 10% of those are colorblind friendly, that's still a lot of games. Um, but I think that ultimately, I'm not colorblind myself, but if I was, I would want to be able to play any game that I wanted, right? And so until we hit like that 100% colorblind friendly, we've got work to do.
Yeah, I did actually a blog on this and put a guide up to give and assist the game designers, and it basically maps out the kind of colors, what works well with other colors. So you don't have to do research; it's already out there. And there are some useful guides as well if you just Google it. So I've put that up on the Pixie Games website, where there's a link to the blog that actually takes you there. Just to help people understand that you can't get it perfect; it's impossible. I mean, you wouldn't
Mhm.
recommend Sagrada, would you? So it's about trying to make it as accessible as possible, but it's only so far you can go because not all colours work together. And sometimes you need a certain colour because it fits
Mhm.
the and that might not always be great for someone who's colourblind, particularly if you've got red and black, for example. So, but sometimes you might need those two colours because that's what fits the theme. So it's almost impossible to design a game without affecting someone with some type of colour blindness.
Yeah, there's a lot of push and pull, and with every game that we put out as a studio at Unexpected Games, there's two things we do. First, we look at if there's player colors in the game or if there's like different colors on cards that you need to tell apart. We run them through a few different color blind filters to make sure that they are you're able to tell them apart. And then second, we always put an icon or some sort on there to help tell them apart. So for example, in 3000 Scoundrels, in addition to having a color for each faction also has a suit. So your clubs or spades or diamonds or hearts. So even if your colors were close to each other, you could always look at the icon and be able to say, oh, okay, that's me.
Yeah, it's helping them as best we can, because we'll never get it 100% perfect, but it's doing a little part, isn't it, to help people make it as accessible as possible.
Yeah.
So let's see what our next one comes out with. See if we get a different one rather than a yes or a no. So our next one to number 4, is agree or disagree. There needs to be more culturally diversity in board game design. So I'm talking specifically, if there's a board game design with just all Caucasian white people, do we need to see more diversity in what's been shown in board game designs?
Agree, absolutely. Like I say this as a white guy, like the majority of board game designers are white guys like myself. And well, that's fine. I think that the more different perspectives, the people coming from different cultural backgrounds, different upbringings, they're just going to bring new ideas and fresh perspectives. And the more that you expose yourself to other people's stories and other people's lives and ideas, I think the richer our lives are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I remember this is a quite, I can't remember which episode it was on, but it's a question that came up, and it's, I don't think people don't deliberately go out and design a game to offend people, or they don't deliberately go there to exclude certain cultures. And a lot of it depends on your upbringing, how you're brought into society as well. Because I mean, when I was brought into society, going way back, it was all white people. There weren't any other cultures. It was white people, and that was it. Scottish white, and that was it. And it didn't change until you get into the 90s. I'm showing my age now, but so when and then the culture starts to change, and you're right, it's what you experience as well that can influence how you design games. So it's important as well to kind of open your mind a bit and see the world from a different lens. It can help to bring a different perspective into your game, because it might be that, oh, I didn't actually realize that. That's changed my thought process and how I might design this game. Actually, I'm going to introduce people that represent this culture into the games. I think that'll give a different flavor. So yeah, you're right. People don't deliberately go out and offend people, but it's important that we widen our lens, have a look at how we can make it diverse as we possibly can, whether it's deliberately trying to offend or exclude people.
Yeah, I think it helps everybody. There's no downside to it.
Absolutely. So let's see what number 5 brings out, Corey. And our 5th question or statement is, once you unravel it, is agree or disagree. It's really poor of a company if you have to go into Board Game Geek for clarification on a rule. So specifically, if the rule book is not clear.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with that. However, having written many rule books, I understand how hard it is and how challenging it is. Um, Ultimately, the player doesn't want to have to go to Board Game Geek in order to play the game, and the publisher doesn't want them to have to do that. We all want the person to be able to open up the game, be able to play with just those components, and they're good. Like if you're camping out in the woods and you brought a game with you, you should be able to play it even if you don't have internet connection, right? That's kind of the dream. Unfortunately, it's not always the reality, right? Sometimes, I don't know, mistakes can creep into the rule book, or maybe we did tons of testing and nobody happened to try these two cards next to each other. We didn't think that that thing would happen. So, I mean, I've worked on a lot of games that have had FAQs, frequently asked questions. And I mean, those sorts of things just come up because people have different different types of people are going to have different types of questions. Something that might seem obvious to one player through reading the rule book might not be to somebody else, depending upon their experience in gaming. So you don't want people to ever have to go to an external website to find answers. But
Yeah. And not everyone knows Board Game Geek, do they? So, so there's, and there are some exceptions. I think there are some horrendously badly written rule books that really need to
Sure.
be. But how on earth was that ever published without having a second pair of eyes to revamp that rule book? I'm going to use one example because I like the game. I've got the game. Castaways. Rule book isn't terrible, but it's not that well written. And you can tell that I needed somebody to go in and restructure a couple of things and make some provide some clarity on some of the rules. So I had to go away and read and found a guide on Board Game Geek, clarify some of the rules. I took that and then adapted it to my own because there was no way of reading that rule book again. So that I just take that quick guide, read that, and then I'm starting to play the game again. So I shouldn't have to do that, but I wasn't
No.
going to experience of rereading that rule book. And you question, well, surely you would have to find some funds to pay someone to review that rule book and actually get to the standard to make it as accessible as possible to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time and I've written some good rule books and some not so good rule books, and I've learned a lot over the years. Um, I think the biggest challenge to writing a rule book is that you're really writing it for two different audiences. You're writing a rule book for the person who knows nothing about this game and is learning it for the first time, and you're writing it for the person who is in the middle of playing the game and is trying to look up a rule. Because the more complex your game is, the harder it's going to be to remember all the minute details. Um, and so it's very difficult to write one document that can satisfy both of those groups of people. And the more complex your game is, the harder that is.
Yeah, it's a good point. And there's plenty of guides out there as well for writing rule books, and it's definitely worth checking those guides out.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
So let's move into our 6-1, Corey. Let's see what comes out. So this is what phrase comes to mind? When you hear the weather forecast is rain and thunderstorms for the next 3 months with no dry days, now just assume that you've got lots of gaming groups you need to attend and the weather is horrendous. What's the first phrase that comes to mind? Or you can't get out there, particularly if it's in a remote area, you're meeting your board gaming group.
First phrase that comes to mind. Hunker down, I guess. Like makes me think of kind of winters when I lived in Minnesota. Sometimes it'd just be so cold, you didn't want to leave the house. You're just like, okay, well, we're just gonna for the next week just spend time with the family and do things at home, snuggle up with a book, play a game with the family. Um, Things will return to normal soon. Hunker down.
Yeah, yeah, and it's if it's for a short time, it's fine. But I live in quite a remote area, and if it snows, because I'm on the top of a mountain, be horrendous trying to navigate around. But generally, even when it has been pretty bad weather, the countries are pretty good at clearing the roads, so it's not been a big issue. I'm sure in some countries it's far worse than the UK when it comes to snow and horrendous weather conditions that can kind of hamper your gaming night because you can't get out to that location now because the conditions are just so bad. And I'm sure it's frustration for some people. Like you say, you just adapt and think, well, let's have a family night in for a change, and maybe let's watch a movie we
Yeah.
haven't months.
We'll push it back a week. We'll do it. We'll do it next time. I had a game. We were supposed to have a game night yesterday. People were sick. We rescheduled. It happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see what that happens in our next question or scenario, Corey. So we're on to number 7. So our 7th one is a yes or a no. Should board game companies do something about the cost of shipping for crowd-funded games?
This is a tricky one. So I've never published a game through crowdfunding before. I've purchased plenty of games through Kickstarter and the like. Um, I think I've been pretty fortunate because I live in the United States and generally the shipping to the US is pretty reasonable for most campaigns, but it depends upon the company. I think we've become so used to places like Amazon that have free shipping that we've almost learned that, oh, that's free. Like it doesn't cost money to get that package to me. But at the end of the day, it really does. And if you're a publisher that is paying to ship these things, like, I mean, it's not just the money that you're paying to UPS so that someone they can afford to send a driver out to your house, but it's the box, it's the shipping materials so that the game doesn't get damaged. It's the manual labor of packing that box up. So um, it's a surprising amount of work just to get a game from a warehouse to your door. So this was a yes or no question. Should they do more? Um, I think yes, they should be as upfront and honest as they can be. But I think the other trick with Kickstarter is that some of these games are from people who've never published a game before, and they don't necessarily know how much it's going to cost to get this to you to do the fulfillment side of things. And it oftentimes is a lot more expensive than they expected, which could be why sometimes when people finally get the cost of shipping, they're like, why is this so high? I think that the publisher probably had the same concern when they got their quotes back from fulfillment companies.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think what's vital sometimes is maybe going through a reputable company. So I'm going to use one example, Asmodee, who cover the majority of the world, don't they? And they've got distribution centers all over, but they've got connections. They can, get good deals in the shipping costs, etc. But also you're paying an additional fee for them to manage all of that as well. So people don't always see the behind the scenes cost of what's involved. And sometimes when you bypass that and maybe go direct to a fulfillment company, you've then got to negotiate the contract, and you're competing with others using their ship to be able to
Yeah.
place on that ship, and there's a bit of a competition for that. And what usually happens is that people don't see is you'll have one company, perhaps I'll give an example, a fulfillment company might say, right, we've got someone else who needs to use the shipping in this day. They're paying this, you can have the slot if you pay this. And sometimes you have that kind of barging of trying to get a deal, but also trying to get your shipment out as well. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that can drive
Yeah.
the that people don't tend to understand. And it's not as simple as phoning, going to the post office to ship a package off. It doesn't work like that. So there's a lot more
Hmm.
than people think.
It's very involved, and luckily, I my studio is a part of Asmodee, so they handle all that behind the scenes stuff for me. I don't have to worry about fulfillment because there's entire teams of people negotiating prices and making that stuff happen. But I'm imagining what it would look like if in the rule book of a game we actually credited everyone who touched that game, right? Like everything from like the manufacturing, everyone who helped assemble it, to printing it, to prepping files, to getting it to your door. Like there's probably 1,000 people behind the scenes that touch every game before it reaches you, and they all need to get paid.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you use something like Quartermaster Logistics in America or Asmodee in Europe, there is a high cost associated because they have to pay the employers, don't the employees? So there's a cost associated to it all, and that's what people don't see sometimes.
Yeah, it's wild. I get overwhelmed when I think about that stuff sometimes, like, oh man, there's so much involved in this. So I try to focus on my little world of making games so other
Yeah.
people can make sure they can get them to customers.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely for a newbie, perhaps stick with someone who's reputable, who has those connections, and can deal with all that headache stuff, can make that experience a lot smoother. Definitely would recommend doing that. And yes, there's a cost associated to it, but it means you can guarantee your game's getting out to the backers.
Yeah, and I feel especially bad for people that live in more remote countries or remoter parts of the world where shipping is just astronomical for them to get a single game that's like an event for them because it's going to cost them so much money to get it into their country. Like that's makes me a little sad when I think about that. But the world is slowly becoming more interconnected, and those remote parts will hopefully see some cost benefits eventually.
Yeah, unless you live in the UK and then exit from Europe. But anyway, that's in. And not reap the benefits of shipping, I can assure you, because of that happening. But there we go.
No.
Let's swiftly move on to our next one.
Yeah.
So we're on number 7. And oh, there we go. It's flew out. So our number 7 is a yes or no question. Are dice towers necessary?
I'm going to say no. I never use dice towers. Like unless a game comes with it, I'm not really going to use one. Um, we have like got a little tray that a friend usually brings when we're playing a game with dice that we'll roll into so that we don't knock over any components. But um, rolling dice is random and I don't know. What's the appeal of dice towers? Do you know, Jay?
Well, I suppose it depends on the functionality used. I suppose if you look at El Grande, that's got a
Oh,
tower, but cubes, isn't it? You don't know which
mhm.
cubes out. So that function has a clear functionality and integration into the board game design, and that makes sense. But when
Yeah.
it's rolling some random dice, yeah, it looks cool. It looks great. It's an accessory, but it's not necessary because people love the physicality of chucking dice, don't they? And seeing what they get. And
Hmm.
that's the exciting bit. And I think using a dice tower, for me, takes away that excitement.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see what other people think on dice towers because yeah, some of them look amazing and yeah, they look great, but it's more of a gimmicky thing. I feel. But I'm not a dice person, so I'm probably not the best person to come
Yeah.
on that. And I'm sure D&D fans will have a different viewpoint. So let's
The
move.
one piece about dice advice that I got that has stuck with me through the years was from Kevin Wilson, who did Descent and Arkham Horror and a whole ton of other games. And he said it is a lot more fun to roll more than one die at a time than to roll a single die. So when you're designing a game, if your game is just like roll a single D6 or D10 or whatever, it's more fun if you have at least two dice in your hand that you kind of get to clink together as you're shaking your hands and toss them out. And it's true. And I never thought about it until he mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, I think we've answered that question that, yeah, dice towers are not necessary. So there we go. We'll let that argument continue. Let's move in to our next one. Okay, so we're on to number 9, Corey. And our ninth question or statement, once I get to open this, is an agree or disagree question. The war game style rulebook should be abolished. Now, I don't know if you played war games,
Yeah.
but they can tend to be extremely complex in how they're laid out, and they've got different graphs sometimes to explain the pathway of how something works. Would you agree or disagree with that statement? It should be abolished and perhaps a different style rulebook written.
No, I mean, some people actually prefer that format. Not myself, but I've seen plenty of war game style rule books, and they'll have a number for every single like line in the rule book. 1.1, rule 1.2, rule 1.4. Like it's very helpful as a reference, especially if somebody has a question and you can answer them like, well, actually, that's answered on rule 27.2. It it functions and it works well for people who have a very procedural type brain in the sense that I think those rule books work very similar to like computer instructions. If you ever done computer programming, you need to be very like exact, one step, the next step, the next step. Um, it's not terribly fun to read because it's very technical. It's like reading a manual for a microwave. But it really depends upon who you are. Some people prefer it to be very technical, and some people learn easier when it's more personal.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's a good analogy of that. And yeah, I mean, I haven't got a problem with them. I just don't find them fun. I'm not a war gamer, so I don't tend to play war games at all. But yeah, they are quite procedural, and I don't understand why they have to be like that. But that's fine. That's still a real book it is, and that's how it is, and it works. It functions. Then that's all that matters. It's not board game rule books are not designed to be fun. In general, they're designed to give you instructions on how you play the game.
Yeah. And honestly, some people who like those types of rule books, if they bought a war game and it wasn't in that format, they might be upset.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So let's see if you're upset with the last one because I have no idea what this last one's going to be. It looks like it could be, and it is, an agree or disagree. So big branded supermarkets and retail shops stock the worst board games, gimmicky and luck-based. Now, I know this varies in different countries. So I know in America, we've got Target, etc., and who've, got a lot more modern games on the shelves. But if you look at the UK, usually it's tacky, cheap, horrible, nasty games that are on the shelves. But do you feel that really that's all the stocking, or do you think we've evolved since then?
Um, I'm gonna generally agree with that. Like just thinking of like a supermarket. If I were to go to a supermarket and try to buy a game now, they would have like Uno and maybe Monopoly. Like they tend to have like the barest mass market stuff, maybe tied into a license. And I think it's taken us many years as a hobby to teach people that licensed board games don't have to be like that. They don't have to be cheap and quickly thrown together, as one might expect from one of those, like a mass market board game. I think that just looking at my childhood, what a mass market game is, and looking at today, what a mass market game is, I think that we've evolved a lot, and we're starting to teach people that like, hey, you know those board games you played as kids? Like you thought that there was just Risk and Monopoly and Sorry. Well, guess what? There's a whole deeper world of games that are a lot more fun. Um, and I think it's improving in the mass market. I really think it is.
Yeah, I remember this going back a few years ago. So it was in work. So we had a team building day. So yeah, I was put in to lead that and develop this team leading day. So I brought in board games, and I thought one of them was Magic Maze and the other was Code Names. So no dice, nothing. So first
Yeah.
question I asked was, "Where's the dice?" Because all the it was Monopoly. So to them, there's got to be dice. It's like there's no dice. I went, well, how's it going to work then? There's no dice. So, and believe it or not, everyone who played Magic Maze didn't like it. They were frustrated because they couldn't communicate. So, apart from banging this large, ridiculously large
Yeah.
table, and then they actually loved code names and actually went out every single one of them went and bought code names because I said I can play this with my family. And I was just over the moon and thrilled that they found the board game that they can play that doesn't involve dice. It doesn't involve Monopoly or a tacky game. It's actually a cooperative. It was a fun, exciting game that anyone can get into. So you can introduce new gamers to new gaming concepts and they can enjoy it. It's just getting past that initial barrier, isn't it? And that can be
Yeah.
tricky.
And I think that like playing a game like Code Names with people who've never played a game like that before, it can be an eye-opening experience. And as someone who teaches lots of games to lots of people, that is an amazing moment when they say, wow, that was really fun. And you knew that they came into it expecting like, oh, we're gonna play a board game. If they come in with that emotion in mind, and then they actually have fun from it, like that's, I don't know, we've just converted a new person to seeing the big wide world of board games.
Yeah, it's an amazing. It is an amazing feeling. You think that's just amazing. They've opened their eyes now to a world that's not Monopoly. It's not Trivial Pursuit. There's a new world out there. So
Yeah,
yeah, definitely it can work if you do it right. But that was an interesting experience. Definitely that team building. I definitely wouldn't recommend introducing Magic Maze because that really does frustrate a lot of people. So
I
it
bet.
works, and I've even introduced people to another team building exercise, Pandemic, that we played.
Okay.
But that didn't quite go down as well as Code Names because I think there's a bit more to Pandemic than Code Names.
Hmm.
It's quite a lot lighter, and it's a lot bit more fun and less serious for newbies. But
Hmm.
that is to the end, Corey, of this. I hope you've enjoyed it,
Yeah.
and hopefully it's not too difficult for people to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like as well, please. And I'd like to thank our guest, Corey, for joining us for the second time. And this is our final season of Under the Meeple Lights. And we'll be introducing more guests as we go through the season. Now, please do get involved as well. Leave a comment down below. Let us know your viewpoint on some of these statements or questions. And Corey, I hope you enjoyed it this second time round.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Well, thank you for participating. And once again, thank you to our guests and our audience for watching this. And please hit that subscribe button. And until next time, take care.